Hello, folks. Let's do this. I'm leecamp, joined by Eleanor Goldfield. Happy Friday. That's not the right part, start of that sentence, but day 140 of the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people by Israel. The amount of bombs that have been dropped is just truly unbelievable. We're going to bring you some updates on Israel, as well as some debunking of the latest systemic sexual violence report that Israel has been floating around, that our mainstream media, much of our mainstream media, has been adopting without even with zero incredulity, with zero questions as to where exactly they got their information. But yeah, Israel's even losing in this ongoing genocide. They're losing the corporate medias. Like the AP says Israel's military campaign in Gaza is seen as among the most destructive in recent history, experts say. In just over 2 months, researchers say the offensive, and it is offensive, has wreaked more destruction than the razing of Syria's Aleppo between 2012 and 2016, Ukraine's Mariupol, or proportionally the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. It has killed more civilians than the U.S.-led coalition did in its 3-year campaign against ISIS. The vast majority of bombs dropped on the besieged enclave are U.S.-made, it also adds in there. But this is even coming from the AP.
I feel like the AP has moments. I mean, not like the Intercept has moments, but the AP has moments where they do an appropriate amount of reporting. So I'd be more surprised if I saw that like in CNN or some shit. But I agree, it is
true. But
it's good to see.
I've also brought a few CNN reports that were actually legit now.
No, I know, but
granted, they were the exception that proves the rule, but
right. Still. And there's well, I guess I don't want to like skip ahead, but people are going after corporate media for doing a total shit job at just reporting facts. I don't know if the New York Times.
Oh, you want me to bring the New York Times protest?
Well, it seems like a good segue.
No, I like it. It actually was next up on the docket. Although, let me just tell everybody, we are going to, like I said, bring you the latest systemic sexual violence report info, but also we're going to get into new documents, newly revealed through Freedom of Information Act documents that show exactly how the FBI and how early the FBI was going after environmental activists trying to stop pipelines. And I do not mean just the ones that, actually did something to the construction equipment, whatever it was that one of them did. But I mean, these are all kinds of activists. Anyway, I'm going to bring you that information and much more. That's just a couple of the stories we got going. So please hit thumbs up, hit subscribe. The thumbs up actually help with the algorithm. But yes, I love this action by these activists at the New York Times, calling them to account. Do you want to describe it, what we're watching here?
I think you need the audio.
Oh, well, no, it's just the alarm.
I know.
Balloons have alarms attached to them, and it says sound the alarm in the occupation, but it also talks about blood on your hands, and it has to do with the New York Times coverage of this genocide. And of course, it is
lack thereof.
Yeah, lack thereof. Sorry, it is obviously pro-Israel coverage. Again, if you find an occasional New York Times article that talks about how many, is really centered on how many civilians have died in this, it is the exception that proves the rule. It is a rarity.
And I love that the New York Times supports genocide. And I love this too, because just like speaking as somebody who loves creative actions, this is going to be a pain in the ass to fix. Like they have to somehow get the balloons down.
Yeah.
Which I just love the idea of them having to get down these balloons that are beeping incessantly and have like free Palestine on them. I mean, props to the folks who came up with and executed this action.
Yeah.
Badass. And again, like, and then like everybody who walks through the doors has to like look at that piece of paper that says New York Times supports genocide. And I think it really is important to do these actions that call out media, because the media is really our lens on the world, and it's why so many people still support the US empire, and also why the facade is cracking in terms of the genocide in Gaza, because alternative media is getting through, but also the people on the ground are getting their message through. The amazing unbelievable journalists on the front lines in Gaza, the Palestinian journalists who refuse to sit down and shut up, even in the face of genocide. Those stories are getting out, regardless of the shit heads at places like the New York Times. So calling out corporate media for not covering that, for not sharing the stories of the people being genocided, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and great job for creative activism. It reminds me of, in terms of how difficult it is, because, you know, the New York Times and the lobby personnel can't just realize the balloons are there. They then have to, do we have ladders tall enough? Do we have blow darts? How exactly do we take those balloons down? It reminds me of an action I did years and years ago. I was part of, definitely. I was a small part of this action years and years ago. But I was one of the guys dressed as a maintenance crew that went onto the Koch-funded Lincoln Center and put up a giant banner. This is back during the days of the Tea Party. I believe the banner said, "We're the Tea Party's wallet," because they were funding the Tea Party. And but it was a giant sticker. You can actually buy 10-foot stickers or whatever. And we got up on ladders.
It's America. You can buy anything.
Put this onto the wall. It's just barely enough time to get the hell out of there before the security saw us. And then there was a big march and everything, drawing attention to this projection and everything. And the cops came and they thought they were protecting the building from us, activists or marching people, and they didn't realize this giant banner was up there. So they're standing there. Awesome. There's great photos of them standing there looking big and tough, thinking they've protected the building from the evildoers, not realizing that this giant banner was up there.
Well played, sir.
Well played. Well played. Okay, so I actually, if it's okay with you, I'd like to play a 1-minute clip of a Palestinian ambassador to the UK speaking on television he's talking about the argument in the House of Commons in the UK about whether they should call for a ceasefire. Oh, no, they shouldn't. And he's also talking about the UN vote that the US just vetoed
for the third time
2 days ago. Anyway, I think I love his passion, and I think it's an interesting 1 minute.
Had MPs agreed and called for an immediate ceasefire, Israel.
Sorry, I think I skipped the 1 second there. He says, would it have mattered?
What difference would it have made had MPs agreed and called for an immediate ceasefire? Israel wouldn't have listened. Hamas wouldn't have listened.
If you think for a second that Israel would have been able to commit all these atrocities over a period of 75 years without the tacit support of countries like the UK and the US, think again. Israel was created by the UK. It was a UK declaration that has enabled Israel to do so. And since then, the US and the UK and the rest of the West has picked up the support. You've seen what the US did yesterday in the Security Council, opposing an immediate ceasefire, using the veto power for the zillion times to end the genocide, and therefore this is enabling genocide. So no, the outside world, Britain does provide...
You think the Israeli government would stop?
The Israeli government will only stop when Britain takes itself seriously as an actor in the international arena. What is happening is not only affecting the Palestinian people. What is happening is going to affect all of us. This is going to spiral regionally and globally.
Well said, but also, of course, Israel couldn't get away with this without the approval of the United States and the UK.
Right. And actually in the book, 100-Year War on Palestine, the author, Khalidi, makes a great point that, yes, as this ambassador said, the UK created Israel. It was by UK mandate that Israel was first created, and then at some point, the mantle passed. Like as the British Empire started to contract, the US Empire took its place. But the UK has always been, since the beginning, since that mandate, has always been very active in support of Israel. So Yeah, I mean, it's so convenient for and I don't actually know if the guy was just trying to play devil's advocate or if he is a piece of shit. The guy asking the questions.
Sometimes it's tough to tell the difference.
Yeah, like does he have those hard hitting questions for Israeli ambassadors, or is he just like, oh, how does it feel to be you? So, where was I going?
You said it's tough to know whether he's really a piece of shit or he's just playing devil's advocate in terms of doesn't matter.
Nope, lost it.
Nope, gone. Anyway, everything up
I'm sure it was interesting, whatever
good to that point, as they say in filming. Good to that point. Okay, so let's get into this report, which the mainstream media is, of course, chomping at the bit for. They love this. They love to take Israel's reports without looking further into them at all. And I got to warn you, and I'm going to avoid the worst of it, but this is a horrific topic. Even if some or much of it is lies, it still is horrific to hear about, even if it is fake. It's horrific to hear about. So I'm just warning you that that's coming up. But so there's a report that Israel has put out, detailing in many ways the systemic sexual violence. This is not saying that one Hamas fighter did something horrible. This is saying systemic sexual assault as a weapon of war is what this report is detailing. And the Gray Zone did a good job of breaking this down because most mainstream media, of course, and here they've got a shot of the CNN coverage. Disturbing new report on sexual violence by Hamas on October 7th. The Gray Zone is talking about how the new Israeli report alleging systematic and intentional rape by Hamas relies on debunked Western media reports. Western media outlets are hyping a new report by the Israeli government-affiliated Association of Rape Crisis Centers, ARCC, which maintains that Hamas combatants carried out a campaign of systematic and intentional rape on October 7th. The report shows systematic rapes, murder of women in Israel on October 7th. The Germany's DPA, that's one of the mainstream outlets, and he lists some others, as well as, of course, CNN, the photo you saw. Despite the AP's acknowledgement that the report, quote, did not specify the number of cases it had documented or identify any victims, even anonymously. I'm not saying they got to give victims names, but even anonymously, they didn't detail victims. And that its authors, quote, declined to say whether they had spoken to victims, unquote. Dozens of mainstream outlets have presented its findings as incontrovertible fact. Yet a close examination of the report reveals that the paper is short on new research, absent of hard evidence, and reliant instead on clips from factually challenged articles by the same Western outlets promoting its publication. And what we're about to get to is this kind of circle jerk where, and it's not just about Israel, the U.S. will often do this about other accusations like the Russian Taliban bounty story and stuff like that. They'll get some outlet like the New York Times to print it without any evidence. Basically, CIA sources say, and they print it. And then every other source sources the New York Times article. Then you'll have a report that sources the people that source the New York Times article. And it's just a big circle jerk without anyone looking in to where the initial source was. Like what is the evidence? To continue from the article, among the paper's most frequently cited sources is an infamously shoddy New York Times report by Jeffrey Gettleman purporting to detail how Hamas weaponized sexual violence on October 7th. However, following an internal staff uproar prompted by a series of Gray Zone exposés, which the internal New York Times staff, which highlighted major inconsistencies and demonstrable falsehoods by the paper's sources, the New York Times canceled an episode of its podcast about the article. So this new report is sourcing a completely discredited report in the New York Times. And that journalist then went on. I've showed this clip before on this live stream, but I really need to show it again because it is so amazing. He then went on to say that evidence is not important when reporting things. Listen to this.
I don't want to even use the word evidence because evidence is almost like a legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation or prove a case in court. that's not my role. We all have our roles, and my role is to document, is to present information, is to give people a voice. And we found information.
I don't want to use the word evidence because my job is not to have evidence. This is a writer for the New York Times.
Well, so here's the thing. Like, if you were to say, if he were to write in an article, for instance, so this is what this person said, and I haven't been able to corroborate it, that's fine. Because then you're saying, I don't have the evidence, so I'm just going to quote this person about this issue. That's fine, but that's not what you're doing. You're claiming that you do, like you're writing it as if it's true, but you lack the evidence. So that's the problem. If you were to like write an article like, I don't know what the fuck's going on, like that's fine. Then do that, because then nobody expects you to have the evidence. But if you write something under the guise of having that evidence, of being factual, because the New York Times does not put up headlines being like October 7th rape ? I don't know. Like, that's not what they're doing.
Right.
So therefore, you are obligated to have evidence when you write as if you have it, you piece of shit. That's the whole point. And this is also the whole point of propaganda. It's to make it appear as though we have all of the answers, or like, as Alex Jones likes to say, all the documents, when you don't. When you've got
theories.
When you've got like bupkis, basically. I wanted to say F-all, but
Bunk.
Bunk?
Bunk.
Bunk. Oh, I thought you said bunt, like a bunt cake.
Bung.
Bung? I think we're going off the rails here.
Dung.
Dung? Well, okay. To quote Lee Camp, if you got your thumb up your ass and your dick in your hand, that's not nothing.
That's not nothing. So they then go on to say the ARCC report also relies substantially on testimony from Zaka, the ultra-Orthodox quote-unquote rescue group. That sounds a lot like the White Helmets, which introduced false allegations that Hamas beheaded babies, cut fetuses from pregnant women, and had lunch in Israeli families' home after killing and mutilating them. Zaka has been lambasted even in Israeli media, even in their own propaganda media, for serially mishandling evidence from the October 7th attacks and even staging atrocity scenes for fundraiser purposes.
Also, to be clear, the people having lunch and rifling through people's possessions are Israeli soldiers. They are the ones that take pictures of themselves going through Palestinians' homes, stealing their shit, like to the level that is so shockingly mirror image of the Nazis who did the same thing, posing with like art and jewels taken from Jewish homes. I mean, those are the ones doing those things. Let's be clear.
Yeah, I covered it yesterday. The photos of the IDF have posted themselves.
Right.
Of them taking stuff from the homes of Gazans. Anyway, last little part here. At least 1/4 of citations in the ARCC's paper are drawn from the widely panned New York Times article and credibility strained, to say the least, Zaka volunteers. The rest of the paper relies on dubious self-proclaimed witnesses like the Israeli army reservist Sherry Mendez, who falsely claimed that Hamas not only cut a fetus from a pregnant Israeli woman, but beheaded its mother. All of this has been completely debunked. And so this report, and here's the thing, if you wanted to put out a report that you legit, I don't know, that you tried to say, look, some of these things could have happened. We need to look into this more, trying to bring real evidence. That's one thing. But this report is the polar opposite of actually having any evidence to show systematic sexual violence by Hamas.
And I know I've said it on the show and on other shows too. Sexual violence is a very useful ploy, a tool really in these instances, because it is so difficult to quote unquote prove. Particularly, like I saw in that article that there's a dead body and it's like a young woman and it's a dead body and the like half of her clothes are missing. Could have been like blown off. Maybe she was attacked while she was getting dressed or something. But I don't know. By the IDF? I don't know. But here's the thing. They just go ahead, snap a picture, and then they say Hamas did this. Hamas raped her. And nobody can say anything because you don't need evidence of that in these instances because it's like impossible to prove anyway, especially with like the burned bodies and things like the concert goers. How could you possibly prove that? So it is really, and I hate to say this because legitimate sexual attacks and rapes are horrific, and the fact that fake ones are then used to perpetuate a genocide, or like it's just so grotesque and disgusting. But it is not uncommon. We see this in other issues and in other like people using sexual assault as a tool to just shut people up and shut people down, because it's not like somebody being it's why the beheaded babies one is not something that they're bringing up anymore, because that's pretty easy to prove. Do you have any beheaded babies? No? Okay. But rape is and sexual assault, these are difficult things to quote unquote prove. So anybody who questions it is then just like a total misogynist and an asshole, and like it just it gums up the argument. And this is why it's so useful for Zionists in this moment, because they can just say that you're anti-woman, or that you want Israeli citizens to be gang raped, when of course that's obviously not the point. The point is this disgusting propaganda that's used to perpetuate genocide.
Well said. And let's see if I have this one. Yeah, then believe it or not, this I think is an important point here. An investigation by Mizbar reports that only 4 Western media outlets have covered a recent report by UN experts confirming Israel's use of sexual violence against kidnapped Palestinian women. Meanwhile, all media outlets, according to the report, published more than one material about Israel's allegations accusing resistance fighters of sexual crimes, or accusing Hamas of sexual crimes. So it's like there's a report on Israel using sexual violence that is essentially not covered at all. And there's a report of that we were just talking about, the Debunked report about Hamas using sexual violence, that is covered on just about every mainstream media outlet. And that's how they do this. And just one last point on this is, I mentioned the circle jerk of like, someone makes a false claim that's then reported without evidence by like the New York Times or some of these other main outlets. And then other reports then say, oh, well, as was covered in the New York Times. That, again, I just want to reiterate, that is not a new tactic used by the empire, used by the U.S. and Israel. It was used. It's been used for things. One of the biggest ones was the Uyghur so-called genocide, right? They were eager. The U.S. was very eager to call that a genocide, despite even they admitting that no one had been murdered. They were arguing it was a cultural genocide because they were put into labor camps and things. But if you actually looked, and I did a whole segment on this several years ago, 2-3 years ago on Redacted Tonight, if you actually looked into who the sources were for these claims that there was a genocide against Uyghurs, it was about 4 sources, and they were all connected to either the Pentagon or essentially the Australian military or their think tanks. And the Australian military is equivalent to the U.S. military in terms of wanting anti-China rhetoric. And then the final sources, so it was like 4 of those, and then the other one was this nutbag Adrian Zenz, who's a German evangelical who says his mission in life is to bring down China, and also says that all Jews will burn in hell after the end times.
Which is what Christian Zionists believe.
And so those were their sources. It was all U.S. military, Australian military, and Adrian Zenz. And those were their sources. And yet you saw this perfect circle jerk activity where this so-called report comes out. That report is then covered without hardly even talking about the sourcing in mainstream media, AP, Reuters, etc. That is then used by Congress, by other think tanks, by other reports saying, well, clearly we know China is committing a genocide against Uyghurs. Even if you go to China, there are mosques all over the place, and people can openly go and attend, prayer at these mosques.
But weren't they getting 4 IUDs a day?
Yeah, that was one of the funniest parts. Is Adrian Zenz accused them of using some number of IUDs on the people in Xinjiang province, and if you actually look at the per capita number, it was 4 IUDs a day.
Seems like a lot.
Seems like
considering they last several years.
Seems like overkill. 4 IEDs on one woman a day.
A day.
It's just so rough. Stop doing that, China. Just stop it. Just stop doing that. Okay, let's see. You want to do this one next, and then we'll get to the FBI documents?
You have the documents?
I have the documents. Or do you want to do, how about cop cities across America?
Yeah, let's
talk about cop cities across America.
So there is, folks probably know about the cop city in Atlanta, but did you know that it's not alone? And also, in terms of a segue, which I'm not usually good with, but here you go. These training facilities would also work with, invite, and exchange tactics with Israeli forces. That is that has been an ongoing and long-lasting relationship that our police, our militarized police, have with Israeli forces. It's called the Deadly Exchange. Well, Jewish Voice for Peace.
Do they call it?
Yeah, I mean, they probably do. They like that kind of shit.
I know.
They probably like it. So, so there's this map that was put out by Is Your Life Better? Which I love that. It's isyourlifebetter.net, which I really love.
It's a good name.
But I mean, it's also like, if you look at the sources, it's really well done, really well researched. And so there's a map. Would you like to share with the class?
Let's do it.
So here's a map of cop cities in the US, and it outlines ones that, if you look at the key, outlines ones that are on the planning stage, approved for construction, under construction, facility open in multiple phases. So that's a lot.
And let's remember how awful the cop city in Atlanta has been. I mean, major protests against it, using hundreds of millions of dollars, knocking down the only remaining forest in the city of Atlanta to do this. Like, there's so many reasons it's terrible. And yet other cities and towns across America are like, we want one of those.
And it's because, I mean, obviously because they don't care about the forest, they don't care about anything, but it is deemed necessary to continue and ramp up the militarization and the Nazification of our police in this country, which we will be seeing more of as time progresses, as people begin to see more and more the reality of an empire in decline, right? As more and more people take to the streets, as more and more people go on strike and things like that, the facade will continue to crumble. And as the facade continues to crumble, on the other side of that facade, you're going to see a lot of dudes in riot gear. And also just to point out, like, the interconnectivity of these issues, like, I don't know how much all of these cost. A lot of them are like in the, 10 to 20, $30 million range. The one in Baltimore is planned at $330 million, which
$330 million. And the one in Hershey, Pennsylvania, $300 million.
Like Hershey, like the dude, like Hershey. Okay. There's a chocolate factory in Hershey as well. Although it's disgusting chocolate. I wouldn't even call it chocolate. Anyway, that's a side point.
Everyone knows about Hershey chocolate.
So, well, and here's interesting too. Like, folks will remember things going down in Washington, not least of all, like, I mean, this was, 25 years ago now, the battle for Seattle, but the incredible, like, anarchist and left-wing organizing that's happened in Washington state. So, I mean, there's like 4 or 5 cop cities planned in Washington state. Coincidence? I think not. But again, so, like, looking at the price tag of these things, people in Baltimore lack a wide range of basic services: good schools, healthy food, clean air. I mean, all kinds of basic services, not to mention healthcare. A neighbor of ours works with addicts to try to get them mental support and also, like, healthcare support, and is always up against an endless stream of, like, how are you going to pay for that? We can't pay for that. We can't pay for that. And it's like, Well, no shit, because we're going to put $330 million into a cop city so that we can better oppress the people who have mental, physical, and emotional problems. Great. That seems like a way better use of our money. Not to mention, things like the school to prison pipeline, because
No.
why the hell bother putting money into schools? All of these things are interconnected. And so hating cop cities because you hate cops, that's great. But hating cop cities because of the deeper understanding of the systemic interconnectivity of all of these issues that oppress us is vital, and therefore vital to fight these cop cities wherever the closest one to you is, because unfortunately, wherever you are, there's one nearby.
Yeah, I think you tied it all together very well there. The amount of money going towards these while people are suffering in so many ways. I mean, you have homelessness increasing and hunger increasing and poverty increasing in one form or another, and so many people are struggling. And instead, when you're in a waning empire like this, as it continues to crumble, the answer for the ruling elite is more guns and more walls. That really does seem to be where things are headed, as opposed to if you look at areas in the world that have far lower inequality, people are far happier, but there's also a lot less street crime. There's a lot less violence. Inequality is kind of like at the core of so many of those systemic problems.
And somebody in the chat commented, it's interesting to see liberal states like Minnesota and Washington doing these kind of things. I just like to say, yeah, because liberalism is the paved road to fascism. It runs real smooth and real fast.
Yes.
It's way better than the paved roads we have in this shithole country. I'll tell you that.
At minimum, the liberals are the ones out there being like, "Can I help to pave the road?" It's fascism. Oh, awesome. Okay, so this is actually again this easy segue here. Speaking of those being arrested around this country, many of us have been fighting against various oil pipelines, but just fighting for a sustainable world, fighting for many of these are indigenous folks fighting for their sovereignty of their land, fighting to not have their land destroyed via pipelines and pollution. And anyway, we now have documents. These are newly received documents because they don't like to be too quick on giving you the truth about how our FBI and how our law system works to crack down on activists. We have the U.S. government's long crusade against the anti-pipeline movement. And they start off by telling the kind of an individual story, March 5th, 2012. So you remember this was right after and during Occupy, those years there. A convoy of large trucks transporting pipeline servicing equipment were attempting to cross the Pine Ridge Reservation. More than a dozen cars formed a blockade to stop it. Part of a larger network carrying oil from the tar. The trucks were part of a larger network carrying oil from the tar sands of Alberta, Canada, to refineries on the U.S. Gulf Coast. Many indigenous nations in South Dakota, whose land the convoy was attempting to pass through on its way to the Canadian tar sands, fiercely objected to the project. They said they need to turn around. They're not coming through here. Police arrested 5 activists, including White Plume. That's her, I think, last name. And her husband, Alex White Plume. The events did capture the attention of the FBI rather quickly, which you kind of think of the FBI in this country and you think like they have more important things to do than to go after environmental activists.
That's all they do, dude.
They do not. They do not.
Because it's very unusual that they're like what you see on CSI and stuff like that, where there's like just all these people killing, like serial killers going across state lines like that.
All just dental records. A lot of dental records being analyzed.
That doesn't happen that often. And so the FBI, as like the domestic counterpart to the CIA, it's looking inwards, and it's not going to go after the KKK, and it's not going to go after, those lone wolves that we talked about last week, the people amping each other up to go do mass shootings in the name of Hitler, they're not going to go after those people. So what are they going to do? They're going to go after people
and they
who
don't
want to protect the land and the water and the air.
And they don't have enough terrorists to go after, so they've had to try and create a bunch of them, but even that has kind of failed. So yeah, then they have to go after environmentalists. According to documents obtained by Type Investigations, it's called, through a Freedom of Information request, the FBI's Minneapolis office opened a counterterrorism assessment in February 2012, focusing on actions in South Dakota that continued for at least a year and may have led to the opening of additional investigations. These documents reveal the FBI was monitoring activists involved in the Keystone XL campaign about a year earlier than previously known. Their content suggests that long before the Keystone and Dakota Access Pipelines became national flashpoints, because we didn't really start talking about them nationally until 2014, 2015. So the fact that the FBI was monitoring these this early was kind of unknown until now. The federal government was already developing a sweeping law enforcement strategy to counter any acts of civil disobedience aimed at preventing fossil fuel extraction, and young Native activists were among its first targets.
I'm shocked.
But now we have the documents. The 15-page file, which is heavily redacted, also describes Native American groups as potentially dangerous. It likens them to, quote, environmental extremists, you know, people who want like clean water and stuff, whose actions, according to the FBI, could lead to violence.
It could lead to violence if we attack them with dogs and show up in riot gear with MRAPs.
That's not violence. That's justice, peacefulness.
That's protecting pipelines, Lee.
Yeah. The FBI also singled out the Native youth movement, which it described as a mix between a radical militia and a survivalist group. In doing so, it appeared to conflate a specific activist group originally founded in Canada in the 1990s with the broader array of young Native activists who opposed the pipeline decades later. Working in tandem with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, the State Department created an email account to track all Keystone XL protest incidents and monitored events in cities across the country, including Philadelphia, San Francisco, Houston, and Honolulu. The task force even highlighted candlelight vigils held in several major cities in 2014, describing one group of protesters as peaceful, holding candles and signs.
Wait, is that they said that because it was threatening to them?
They were sent there to monitor the groups, and they're describing, even they were like, well, they seem peaceful. These records reveal for the first time that the State Department was also involved in monitoring activists from late 2013. I mean, this, like, the idea that the fucking FBI is spending God knows how much money and manpower on watching people with signs and candles to protect the oil pipelines that are killing us all at the end of the day.
I'm imagining these guys like holed up at a Motel 6 somewhere in like, you know, the middle of nowhere. And then they go to some action where there's like a group of people handing out soup or something. And they're like, yeah, we're undercover. We got to see what's going on here. And it's like people holding signs saying like, save our water. It's like, but I also want to use this as an example to say to all the people who say like, we can't ever start getting into the realm of destroying equipment or anything like that, because then they'll come after us.
Even before.
I just like to point out that they're after you regardless. And I'm not saying that to sound like a paranoid Poppy, paranoid Pippa, paranoid, you know, whatever. Well, it's negative Nancy.
What?
It's negative Nancy.
What is happening?
It's a Debbie Downer.
How about Polly or something? Like something that's actual name.
Pippa's a name.
Pippa?
Yeah, it's popular in England. God, travel.
Pippa? I've never heard of a Pippa.
Pippa.
There's no Pippa.
There's a Pippa.
No.
What was I saying? Okay. I'm not saying this to be paranoid, Polly.
Patricia, someone's volunteer.
Patricia, that okay. I will admit I went weird. I'll admit I went weird.
It's like Poppy. Does it turn Hispanic?
Poppy's a name.
No,
It's also a flower.
Okay.
If people are allowed to be called Daisy, then you're allowed to be called Poppy. I'm just saying. Okay.
My friend Lavender thinks so.
Anyway, I'm not saying this to be paranoid. It's actual. It's a fact. And this is just one example. You know, there's examples going from like, you know, mutual aid groups to Black Lives Matter groups, like whatever it is that you're trying to fight against, that the system feels very deeply about maintaining, whether that's systemic racism, ecocide, you name it. They're going to have a file on you, or at least people that you know. And so the idea that, hey, if we just hold candlelight vigils, nothing bad will ever happen. Two responses to that. A, yes, it will. B, nothing good will ever come from that either. You got to diversify your tactics. You got to be willing to shut shit down, block shit. And you have to be willing to go to use tactics that might not be that popular or that people might be afraid of, because they're infiltrating our spaces anyway. Again, not trying to be paranoid here, but we have to engage in security culture. We have to engage in protecting each other, because the government already is well versed, going back well beyond, well before COINTELPRO,
Well,
like the times
also,
of Emma Goldman and shit. Like they know.
This also speaks to how the government is far more concerned with stopping activists who want to create a better anti-corporate, sustainable, peaceful, equal society. Right. They're far more concerned with that than they are with actually stopping, you know, white supremacists or people that legit just want to harm other human beings for who they are.
I mean, they've got files on people who like Food Not Bombs, who like feed people soup.
Oh my God, they've gone after Food Not Bombs so much.
No, I know, that's my point. It's like, dude, you're on the system. You got crosshairs on you if you give somebody soup. So it's like, let's be real.
Okay. We're going to move on to some more topics, and we got plenty more for you, but you need to join us at rumble.com/leecamp or on my locals page, but it's rumble.com/leecamp. It's free to watch there, so you will not need to pay or anything. Free to watch at rumble.com/leecamp. Join us over there for the rest of this show. We have a bunch more topics coming your way, more news that your mainstream media will not bring you. And please click subscribe, click follow when you get over to Rumble if you aren't there right now. Or if you're there right now, click follow and then click the bell icon so that you at least some of the time will be alerted to the fact that I am going live. We do these live streams. Eleanor joins me on Fridays, but I do these live streams Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. So I hope you will just